In this video, we'll be creating sketch lines, rectangles, circles, and arcs. After completing this step, you'll be able to create a sketch, create a reference plane, use line, arc, circle, and rectangle, and apply sketch dimensions and constraints. In Fusion 360, we're going to start with a new untitled document. For this document, I'm going to leave the default unit set to millimeters. We want to talk about different ways in which we can create sketch elements. We've already looked at lines and creating center point rectangles, but we want to take a look at all of the different elements that are used to create the majority of designs. To get started, I'm going to go to Create Sketch, and I'm going to grab the XY plane, which is also known as the top. From here, we're going to take a look at the Create menu, and once again, we're going to start with line. However, this time I'm going to start at the origin and just draw a vertical line, and I'm going to manually enter a dimension of 75 and hit enter. Notice that we didn't enter the angle dimension, but it automatically gave it a vertical constraint. So now that I have this vertical line, I can change it to a construction line after the fact by hitting X on the keyboard or selecting construction. This means that it won't be available to create a closed profile or be used in an extrude feature downstream, but it can be used for things like a centerline mirror or as a reference. Now that I've created my line, next I want to go on to creating a circle. When I select the circle, notice that in the sketch palette we have center diameter circle, which is the default option, but we also have tangent circles between 2 and 3 lines. We have a 3-point circle, and we also have a 2-point circle. Notice when we do this that the reference points are going to be at different locations. I'm going to use the center diameter circle, and I'm going to start at the end point of my 75 millimeter line, and I'm going to snap to the origin point or the starting point of that line and say OK. Notice that this is now a fully defined circle. If I do the same thing starting at the center and simply drag out to a point and hit escape to get off my circle tool, notice that this is an underdefined circle. Since this is underdefined, I'm going to use my sketch dimension tool to give it a dimension distance between the two circles. I'm going to add 15 millimeters and hit enter, then escape to get off my dimension tool. Now that we've taken a look at the line and the circle tools, let's take a look at the rectangles. We've already created a center diameter or center point rectangle, but we haven't taken a look at the 2-point rectangle or the 3-point. The 2-point rectangle will create references that are horizontal and vertical based on our sketch origin. The 3-point will allow us to select 3 different points and create a rectangle that is not linear or in line with one of our axes. To do this, I'm going to start at the point, which is the center of my circles, and I'm going to just drag it and snap to the outside of one of the circles, and then I'm just going to drag it out in space and then hit escape on the keyboard. It placed a constraint at our first point, and you'll notice that the second point is constrained to the outside circle, but this is free to extend and contract and also rotate around because we don't have any additional references. If we want to fully define this, we can use dimensions and constraints. For example, we can give it an angle of 45 degrees, and then I can give it a distance. When we begin to add the dimension to this angled line, depending on where we place the cursor, it's either going to be horizontal, vertical, or aligned. If we want to lock it to one of those orientations before we place it, we can right-click, and we can select either one of those. For me, I'm going to select aligned, and I'm going to enter a value of 100 millimeters. Then I can hit escape to get off of my dimension tool. So now we've created this reference, which allows us to change the angle, but make sure that this edge is always 100 millimeters long. I'm going to go ahead and put it back at 45. We also want to take a look at creating arcs. When we take a look at arcs, once again, there are a couple different kinds. There's a tangent arc, there's a center point arc, and then there's a 3-point arc. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 3-point arc. I'm going to go from this point, which is going to be my first, Then I need to select the end point. Now for me, I'm going to select this point over here on the outside diameter circle, and notice that it's automatically trying to apply some constraints for us. I'm going to click allow it to create that tangent constraint, and then I'll hit escape. This is an underdefined arc because it's still free to move about. We can see the center point, and we can see that it doesn't have any tangency with our rectangle. So what I want to do is I want to use my tangent constraint to apply a tangency between the arc and this line. When I do that, I'm going to hit escape to get off my constraint tool, and notice that it automatically took this arc all the way around until the point where it could meet those two constraints. That point is free to float around if I modify things like this dimension, if I change it to 125 millimeters, or if I modify this angle. Let's say I bring it down to 30 degrees. So the constraints are going to work with the dimensions, allowing us to create these references that can be flexible in nature and allow our designs to update as needed. From here, let's go ahead and finish this sketch and make sure that we do save this design. For me, I'm going to place it in a new subfolder in my project called Parametric Sketching, and then I'm going to press save, noting that it automatically goes into that folder. I want to call my design Sketching Practice. Simply a good way for us to get some practice with using these sketch elements. After we've saved our sketching practice file, I do want to make sure that we explore one more aspect of creating these basic sketches, and that's construction planes. If we take a look at construct, notice that we have various types of planes, axes, and vertices that we can create. Oftentimes, you can get away with just using the standard planes that are inside of Fusion 360 in the origin folder. These are the XY, XZ, and YZ planes. However, sometimes you might need a plane that is not quite aligned to those different references. I'm going to show my origins so I can see exactly where they're located and take a look at ways in which we can create new construction planes. One thing that we can do is we can create offset planes. This will allow us to select an existing plane or planar face and simply create one that's offset at a certain distance. For example, at 150 millimeters. So now we have a construction plane that can be used that is in line with one of our standard planes, but it's simply offset a certain amount. We also have the option to create a plane at an angle. For example, if we were to select this construction line that we created or one of our reference lines, we can then create a plane that's 90 degrees to that. This is more in line with the rectangle that we created. That reference is still in place, and if we make any adjustments to the original sketch, those references will update as well. Another thing that we can do is we can use the construct option to create a plane along a path. For example, if we needed a plane that is normal to this arc that we created, we can go all the way to its end or its starting point. Now, this is important if we were creating something like a sweep along that path. So we can use all these different types of construction planes to help us create these references that are needed to create any new sketch geometry. It's important to understand what types of planes you can create and what those references are. Some of the most handy ones are going to be the offset plane option, the plane at an angle, as well as the plane along a path. But it is important that you play around with several other types to make sure that you understand them when you need them. I'm going to go back to a home view and I'm going to save this before moving on.